The clip was less than a minute long, but its impact was immediate. Gisele Bündchen's voice, thick with her Brazilian accent, cracked slightly as she spoke about motherhood and resilience during an interview on a popular morning show. Someone isolated that segment, slowed it down just enough to exaggerate the accent, and added a mocking caption. Within hours, it had gone viral. The internet did what it often does, magnified a moment of vulnerability into a spectacle. Meme pages shared it gleefully. Late-night hosts opened monologues with impersonations. Hashtag threads flourished. For a generation raised online, Gisele's accent became the punchline of the week. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life narratives that challenge perspectives and ignite conversations. Backstage, in a quiet dressing room lined with mirrors and soft lights, Gisele sat in silence. The video played again on her phone. She didn't flinch or cry, she just stared. At 44, she had weathered the judgment of cameras, the heat of tabloid lies, and the weight of fame. But this cut differently. Born in Horizontina, a small town in southern Brazil, Gisele had never tried to erase her roots. She moved to the United States at 16, speaking only Portuguese. The modeling world embraced her look, but language remained a struggle, one she attacked with discipline, tutors, and practice. Still, her voice never fully shed its origins. She didn't want it to. Over the years, she became a fixture in American culture. Runways, Vogue covers, Victoria's Secret. She married NFL legend Tom Brady, raised 2 children, and managed to maintain a career while fiercely protecting her family's privacy. Her English wasn't perfect, but it carried the strength of someone who had built a global life on her terms. Now, strangers were ridiculing the very voice that had carried her through press conferences, parenting, public speeches. Their words weren't just cruel, they felt xenophobic, mockery disguised as humor. Her assistant knocked gently before entering. "You don't have to go out there," she offered. Gisele shook her head. "I do." There was a charity gala to attend. Cameras were waiting. Retreat wasn't an option. The car ride through Manhattan was quiet. Her phone buzzed non-stop, texts from friends, links to new clips, half-hearted apologies from a publicist. The worst part wasn't the noise, it was the silence from someone she needed to hear from the most. Tom hadn't called. Their relationship had always been complex beneath the glossy surface. 2 titans, 2 careers, 2 egos. They had weathered retirements, relocations, and relentless media scrutiny. But in this moment, with the world piling on, his absence echoed louder than the laughter online. At the gala, flashes blinded, questions flew. Gisele smiled politely but said little. Her silence was strategic, but her mind raced. In her penthouse later that night, barefoot in the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and scrolled through comments. Some were supportive, others were vicious. What struck her most were the ones that came from people who sounded like her. Immigrants, ESL learners, mothers with accents who felt seen in her struggle. She saved a few of those messages. Then, from the hallway, small footsteps padded into the kitchen. Her daughter, Vivian, hair tousled from sleep, rubbed her eyes. "Why were people laughing at you?" she asked softly. Gisele crouched to meet her gaze. "Because I speak differently." "Is it wrong?" Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. Gisele pulled her close. "No, minha filha. It's who I am." In that moment, the mockery faded, replaced by something clearer. This wasn't about ridicule. It was about identity, and identity, she knew, was worth defending. The following days were relentless. Gisele's name dominated trending lists, not for a new campaign or a philanthropic effort, but for the sound of her voice. Her PR team scrambled, crafting bland statements advising restraint. "This will pass," they said. "Let it fade." But Gisele knew better. This wasn't fading. It was multiplying. The mockery kept escalating. Clips from past interviews resurfaced, edited for ridicule. A popular influencer stitched together a compilation of her most confusing phrases, captioned with laughing emojis and a mocking voiceover. The comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Behind closed doors, her team debated strategy. "Ignore it," one advisor insisted. "Anything you say will be used against you." Another suggested a carefully curated interview to soften the narrative. But Gisele wasn't thinking about press angles. She was thinking about her children. Raising them bilingually had been a priority. She read to them in Portuguese, taught them traditions from her homeland. Language, for her, was not just communication. It was memory, culture, roots. And now it was being weaponized against her. One afternoon, while walking back from a school event, her son Benjamin looked up, troubled. "Someone in class said you talk funny. That maybe you shouldn't talk in interviews." The words hit like ice. She knelt beside him, choosing her response carefully. "Do you think I talk funny?" He hesitated. "No, you just talk like you." "That's right," she smiled, but her heart was breaking. Tom, meanwhile, remained silent. He was busy, yes, mid-season, always consumed by routines, games, press. But this wasn't like him. In the past, he had always stood by her publicly when controversy struck. Now the silence was deafening. Tabloids noticed. Headlines whispered of tension. "Where's Brady?" Gisele faces mockery alone. Columnists speculated about cracks in their marriage, questioning if Tom's American image clashed with her Brazilian boldness. The pressure began to erode her patience. She reread the comments, this time focusing on the ones that came from other immigrants. "I know how you feel. People laughed at my mom's voice too. I was afraid to speak English in public until I saw you." These weren't just messages. They were reminders of the responsibility she carried, even if she hadn't asked for it. But doubt crept in. Was her voice really that strange, that grating? She watched old interviews, listening with a critic's ear. She noticed the rhythm, the pauses, the accent. But also the passion, the warmth, the clarity. Her voice wasn't broken, it was just different. Still, something inside her wavered. That night, as she prepared dinner alone, her phone buzzed again. A text from a close friend, a Brazilian actress who had faced similar criticism. It read simply, "They want you to be quiet, don't let them win." Gisele put the phone down and stirred the pot. The kitchen smelled like Fei Hao, like home. A wave of calm spread over her. Her voice had never failed her when it mattered most. In family, in business, in love. It wouldn't now. She heard footsteps again, but this time they belonged to her daughter. "Are you going to stop doing interviews, Mummy?" Gisele turned, crouching to eye level. "No, minha filha. I won't stop talking." "Not for anyone." Vivian nodded solemnly and hugged her. "Then I won't stop either." The moment sealed something inside her. The storm was still raging outside, but within these walls she had her purpose. Not revenge, not reputation, something stronger. It wasn't a statement, it wasn't a press release. It was a moment, unplanned, raw, and powerful. Following a hard-fought win at a Sunday night football game, Tom Brady stood at the podium, flanked by reporters eager for sound bites. Most expected questions about play strategy or injuries. But one journalist, emboldened by the week's headlines, asked casually, "Has your wife considered hiring a speech coach to help with her accent?" A hush fell over the room. Tom's jaw tightened. He didn't dodge. He didn't laugh it off. Instead, he leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. "That accent you mock," he said, pausing, "it's the voice that raised our children, the voice that comforted me in my worst seasons, the voice that speaks 5 languages, runs a business, and cares more deeply than anyone I've ever met. If that's something to laugh at, maybe the joke's on us." There was no need to elaborate. He stepped back and left the podium. The clip exploded. Within hours, Tom's words topped trending charts. News outlets replayed the soundbite on loop. Athletes, actors, and fans shared the video with hashtags like Respect Gisele and Accent is Power. It was the turning point. For Gisele, watching from home, it was the moment she hadn't known she needed. She didn't cry. She smiled, quietly, but with conviction. Tom had used his platform to reframe the narrative, not as a husband defending a spouse, but as a man honoring a woman's strength. The public reaction shifted quickly. The same accounts that had mocked her now shared apology posts. Prominent voices called out the xenophobia lurking beneath the jokes. Suddenly, people were talking, not just about Gisele's accent, but about what it meant to navigate a foreign language in public, especially under constant scrutiny. Inspired, Gisele decided to speak on her own terms. She recorded a short video. No studio lighting, no background music. Just her in her living room, seated comfortably. She spoke slowly, deliberately, switching between English and Portuguese. "I've lived in the US for more than half my life," she began, "and I'm proud to call this country my home. But I was born in Brazil. I grew up speaking Portuguese. My accent is part of my journey, part of my truth." She paused, then added, "My voice may not sound like yours, but it carries everything I love. My culture, my strength, my story." The video lasted 2 minutes, but it struck a chord, deeply. It went viral in less than a day, not because of outrage, but because of its authenticity. Viewers from all over the world, immigrants, students, multilingual parents, shared their own stories in response. In a sharp pivot, media outlets began releasing editorials examining accent bias. Experts were interviewed on how society often equates fluency with intelligence and how accents become invisible barriers in professional and public spaces. Gisele's experience had touched something far bigger than a celebrity controversy. Even late-night hosts, once quick to joke, reversed course. One opened his monologue with a sincere apology, admitting he hadn't considered the harm behind the humor. The shift wasn't just media-driven, it was cultural. At home, Gisele felt the change too. Vivian was more confident at school, less self-conscious about switching between languages. Benjamin asked if he could write a class report about Brazil. The family dynamic felt fortified, not fractured. For Gisele, it wasn't vindication. It was something deeper, reclamation. Her voice, once turned into a caricature, had become a conversation. And through it, she had rediscovered her power. The ripple effect was undeniable. What began as a cruel jab at one woman's accent had sparked a national reckoning. Across the United States, people began sharing their own stories. A Latina executive posted about being told to speak more American in board meetings. An Indian American professor revealed years of being mocked by students for his pronunciation. Suddenly, Gisele's voice wasn't alone. It had become a chorus. Journalists dove deeper, unearthing studies about accent bias and its subtle but powerful impact on hiring decisions, media representation, and education. The topic dominated talk shows and panel discussions. What was once a joke had become a mirror held up to society. Gisele watched it unfold with a mix of awe and caution. She hadn't asked to be the face of a movement, but now that the conversation had begun, she felt a responsibility to sustain it. She partnered with advocacy groups supporting English learners and immigrants. She visited schools where children were learning multiple languages and spoke about her own experiences. At one school in Newark, a young girl from El Salvador told her, "I used to pretend to be sick when I had to read out loud. Now I think maybe my voice is okay." That one sentence stayed with Gisele, stayed with. She launched a small foundation focused on language equity, grants for ESL teachers, scholarships for bilingual students, cultural awareness programs. The foundation's motto was simple: every voice belongs. Her calendar filled quickly. Invitations came in from non-profits, universities, and even international bodies. When the United Nations invited her to speak during a global panel on linguistic diversity, she hesitated only briefly. She stood before delegates, not as a model or a celebrity, but as a woman whose identity had been questioned and who had reclaimed it. "When you hear an accent," she said, "you're hearing a story, one of migration, adaptation, courage. Let's stop treating that as something to correct. Let's start honoring it as something to respect." The speech drew standing ovations. But for Gisele, the real victories were quieter. Back home, family life found its rhythm again. Vivian had stopped flinching when strangers spoke Portuguese to her in public. She'd even started teaching her best friend basic phrases. Benjamin proudly showed off a presentation he'd done on Brazil's biodiversity, complete with a short intro in Portuguese. Tom and Gisele, once drifting under the weight of distance and unspoken tensions, found a new point of connection. They appeared together in a rare joint interview, reflecting on the past weeks with openness and humility. We were both guilty of thinking we'd done enough to protect each other, Tom admitted. But sometimes silence does more harm than noise. Gisele nodded. I thought I had to be quiet to keep peace. I was wrong. Speaking up didn't start a war, it healed something. Their honesty resonated. Viewers flooded social media with praise, not for perfection, but for the vulnerability they displayed. Among the many letters Gisele received, one stood out. It came from a teacher in Queens who wrote, "After your video, my ESL students held their heads higher. One boy told me, if Gisele doesn't hide her voice, I won't either. You gave them that." Gisele folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with other small mementos. These weren't trophies or headlines. They were proof that something real had shifted. What started as shame had turned into strength. The noise had become meaning. And she wasn't done yet. It wasn't a comeback. It was a continuation. Months after the storm had passed, Gisele Bündchen stood at the heart of New York Fashion Week. The venue buzzed with the usual energy, flashes, whispers, anticipation. But this time, the applause wasn't just for the clothes. It was for her. As she walked the runway, poised and luminous, something extraordinary happened. A voiceover played through the speakers, not a designer's introduction, not a narration, but Gisele's own words. In her unmistakable accent, she spoke, "I've been told my voice is wrong, that I don't sound like I belong. But I've learned that the way I speak carries where I come from, who I am, and all I love, and I will never apologize for it." The crowd erupted, not out of politeness, but from connection. She had turned what once was mocked into a symbol of pride. After the show, reporters didn't ask about designers or fabrics. They asked about language, resilience, and representation. Her message had cut through fashion and fame, reaching something deeper. In the months that followed, Gisele stayed active. Her foundation expanded, launching workshops in cities across the US focused on embracing linguistic diversity in schools. She appeared in public service announcements urging people to listen with empathy rather than judgment. A new cultural awareness began to emerge. Companies implemented accent training, not to erase voices but to train managers in understanding different speech patterns. Schools revised language curriculum to be more inclusive. The change wasn't seismic, but it was steady. Gisele didn't seek credit. For her, the true reward came quietly. In a coffee shop, she overheard a young woman defend her mother's English to a group of friends. In a bookstore, a girl asked her to sign a copy of a bilingual poetry book. At a park, a man approached her with his toddler and said, "My daughter's going to grow up proud of her voice, thanks to you." Tom continued to support her publicly and privately. Their bond, weathered by challenge, seemed more honest now. They didn't pretend to be flawless. They embraced their differences and the work required to grow together. At home, the atmosphere had shifted. There was laughter, music in both languages, a harmony of cultures blending instead of clashing. Gisele cooked moqueca while Vivian set the table, and Benjamin played Brazilian beats from his phone. Life hadn't gotten quieter, it had gotten fuller. As Gisele stood on her balcony one evening, looking over the skyline, she reflected not on the viral clip or the outrage, but on a simple truth. The very thing meant to diminish her had instead revealed her deepest strength. She hadn't fought back with anger or shame. She had answered with presence, purpose, and pride, and that made all the difference. Your voice tells your story. Don't let the world silence it. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more narratives that spark empathy and courage. And don't miss the next powerful story. Click on the video now playing on your screen.